We are going to begin on our snowy winter forest here by using a very large flat-headed brush and a lot of titanium white. I'm trying to cover the top half of this, as you can see, but I drew my trees fairly dark in pencil crayon to ensure that I could still see through that first layer of white paint. That way I didn't have to go back and redraw it later. From there, I'm taking a little bit of a very light blue and creating a vignette around this very white middle portion. It's blending in very softly because we do have a good amount of paint on the canvas, and I'm using a large round-headed brush because it doesn't create as many streaks as a flat-headed brush. So with that being said, I'm just going back, applying more, and really just ensuring that the eye doesn't go out of the painting. The eye looks at the painting and it's drawn into the brightest point, which is the center here. So that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a real line of vision in our painting. So from there, I'm taking a very, very small square-headed brush and a mixture of burnt umber and the blue we were using to create the vignette. And I'm just creating a myriad of little trees here in the background. Now, a lot of them are simply implied, as you can see. When we think of trees, we think of them as brown and large, right? However, these are far in the distance, and the colors, the sky, the snow, all of it, it's reflecting this blue over everything. So they're not going to have that innate brown we think of. As we get closer in the painting, they will get more brown, but in the background, it's a lot farther away, light's reflecting more, and you'll just see a natural progression into more of that brown as we move forward. But here I'm just creating more additional trees. You notice that I have a lot more on the edges of my forest, and in the middle where that light's really coming from, it gets a little bit lesser, right? So from there, I'm taking a medium-sized square-headed brush and I'm beginning to block in a base layer of my snow. We generally think of snow as something that is pure white. However, if you were to paint pure white on the entirety of the ground, it would look fairly flat. And that isn't what we want. We want dimension. We want it to look much more real than that. So we need to put down a darker color first, let it dry, and then we can add our lighter white on top of it. The two will mix, the two will blend, and we'll get varying mounds and bumps, and it'll just look so much more natural. So here, we just need to put in that initial very rough base here of a fairly basic gray. You can throw in a little bit of blue as well, because the blue from the sky and everything will be reflected upon it as well. However, I opted not to because I'm going to have a very blue river in the middle, and I wanted them to be distinguishable. I wanted them to stand out. So with that being said, I'm now going to let that dry, and while I do, I'm taking my very small square-headed brush yet again, and I'm creating more trees. This time they are closer to us, so they're not so much in the light, and they're a little more distinguishable. So we're going to have more brown in the mix here, although they aren't completely brown. There still is a mix of blue, and the idea is that we're progressively going to make them more brown as they get closer to us, as less light, less fog, less snow is kind of covering them. So as you can see, they are still fairly rough, and that is a-okay. Generally, when you are creating the first base layers of your painting, things are going to look fairly rough. It's not until later, it's not until that final 20, 10, 5% where you add the details where it really comes together. So don't get discouraged throughout this portion of the painting. At this point, it's really not supposed to look great. So with that being said, I'm now going in and I'm adding a bit of a highlight to my snow, as you can see, with a white and my medium-sized square-headed brush. I'm trying to create the edges to be a lot brighter, and as we get farther back in the snow, I'm letting it remain a little bit darker, and that's because all of the trees, the trunks, all of that, is going to be casting shadows on the snow, but there is this opening in the center, so that opening is going to be receiving a lot more light, and the snow itself should be brighter there. So we're really just trying to create a bit of a gradient moving backwards, very light in the middle, and then a little bit darker on the outskirts. Once I have the initial portion of that blocked in, I'm going to take my large square-headed brush and a bit of blue with a little bit of white as well, and I'm going to block in what could be a river or, of course, what could be ice right now, right? So I'm just taking this blue and I'm being fairly sharp around my edges. Because I'm using this square-headed brush, it does have sharp edges. It is a sharp corner, and so you can work around detailed areas with it, which is fantastic. That's something you can't really do with a round-headed brush. So whenever you need to work in a detailed space, I'd implore you to use a square-headed brush. But as you can see, I'm just going back and forth, getting more paint, applying it, and I'm applying a lot of it in horizontal strokes, because if it is water, it's going to have a little bit of this rippling effect, right? Back and forth. And it's just going to look much more natural if you paint it in that stroke. I'm then taking some titanium white and applying that here to the middle of the water. I'm leaving the edges a lot darker, so you do distinguish between the water and the snow. And if this were water or ice, it would be reflective of the light in the background, and so that middle portion would be a lot brighter naturally anyway. So it makes sense within the context of our painting. Now, with all of that done, I am taking my very small square-headed brush, the one that I used on all of the trees in the background, and I'm continuing work with it in the foreground on this new larger tree. Now this tree is very close to us, so it's going to be a lot darker in value. As you can see from the background, the closer we get, the darker things get. And again, that's because everything isn't shrouded in light. It doesn't have all of these reflections going on, right? The closer you get in your painting, generally the more saturated things should look and the more of a contrast they should have. So with that being said, as you can see, I'm creating a plethora of miniature little branches coming off of it. And sometimes people say less is more. That is not the case with trees. That is not the case with branches. Keep doing as many as you can. And if you have an issue here creating branches that get smaller and smaller as they move up, as they should, include a lot more water in your mix and it'll be much more viscous. The paint will really move off your brush the way it should, and you'll be able to create very small, very delicate little branches, as you can see moving very quickly there. It does dilute the paint and it does make the paint a little bit more transparent, but that's fantastic here because these smaller branches are going to be lost a little bit more in the reflective nature of our environment, right? It's not going to be as dark as the trunk. So naturally, this is a great thing. This is actually really helpful. It ensures that these branches aren't taking away our attention and we get really small, nice, delicate branches. Now, if I had a lot more time, I would be doing so many more of these. So just for you at home, if you want to spend an hour or two on this painting, do more branches. But I think we're doing just fine with how many we have here. It's a great base. And little tips for branches, make sure they overlap each other, make sure you apply weight to them so they dip down occasionally, make sure that they crisscross because they would naturally in 3D space, right? So with all of that being said, my camera memory card messed up a little bit. We lost a highlight on the snow, but luckily I'm doing the exact same thing here on the water yet again. I'm just taking additional titanium white and I'm applying it to the center areas of all of this in horizontal strokes as we were doing before. So it's really just more of the same, but it really helps the painting look a lot better, doesn't it? So it's a lot of process. You know, you layer on that dark layer and then you add some light. You put on a dark layer and you add some light, and then you add some light, some light, some light, and you just build. With that being said, I'm now taking my medium-sized square-headed brush and applying a couple of rocks in varying areas. It's a fantastic brush to render rocks because it has sharp edges, and so do rocks. So you get those very detailed lines that you need to render these sorts of things. And I'm trying to create a lot of rocks, and the shapes are similar, but they're not all the same. Try to ensure that when you're rendering trees, rocks, mountains, whatever it may be, you don't render two of the same thing. Always make them a little bit diverse, a little bit interesting, and it'll look so much more natural. So from there, I'm taking my linear brush, my liner brush, a lot of water and some titanium white, and I'm just flinging paint at the canvas. This works great for stars, it works great for snow, and here we are just adding the final touches on the 10-minute version. And if you know me, if you know this channel, you know I like to cheat a little bit. I generally do an extra 2 or 3 minutes. And really, I just took the time to add a litany of additional trees in the background. They are subtle, and they just add so much to the painting. They make it so much stronger. So if you have extra time, just add trees. It will make such a big difference to your painting, and I'm sure you'll love it. I also added a couple of little reflections, and just use a lot of water there and have it kind of drift into the reflection, and it'll look fantastic. So there's my final piece. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you had a lot of fun. If you'd like to learn more, there's a link in the description to my book on the essentials of acrylic painting. And of course, I post every Saturday. I hope to see you next Saturday. Thank you so much for watching, and above all, stay creative.